Hey everyone, it's Wolfgang. I want to talk about getting rich two different ways, a slow way and a fast way. By the way, this is part one. I'm going to do a part two probably later this week. It will blow you away. So come back for part two. This is interesting enough as it is, but part two is going to it will be very amazing when you see what's possible. Basically, what I want to do is outline two ways to accumulate wealth. You can start off with a very conservative investment of $100,000 in U.S. Treasuries. This is kind of a slower way to build wealth. The interest rate on the 10-year Treasury is 4.5%. So if you do the math, if we have a 4.5% rate of return for 10 years, the $100,000 after 10 years turns into $155,296. So we invested $100K. We end up after 10 years with $55,296 more. The gain is $155,296 minus our original investment of $100K. We made $55,296 over 10 years on the 4.5% 10-year Treasury. Okay, so that's the slower way. Let's look at the faster way to build wealth. Instead of using the $100,000 to buy 10-year Treasuries, we're going to use that as 20% down and buy a duplex for $500,000. So you might say that's an expensive duplex. It depends on what part of the country you're in. If you're in a destination city or a destination region, parts of California, parts of Texas, parts of Arizona, depending on the state, there are tons of places around our country where duplexes are even far higher than this. In Silicon Valley, you will not find a duplex for under $1 million generally. So this is actually not that high, but just, for parts of the country it is. So I just wanted to cover that. So we're going to take our $100,000 and use it as 20% down and buy a duplex for $500,000. That's the price of the duplex. So the rents, and by the way, the duplex is in a good neighborhood. And you might think, is it possible to spend $500,000 and get a duplex in a good neighborhood? Yes. And again, it depends on the part of the country that you live in. In this particular place, and this is a real life example, by the way, there are two sides to the duplex. One side is renting for $2,000 currently. The other side is renting for $2,500. So the total for the whole duplex is $4,500 a month. So the duplex, the two sides are rented out, and they make a total of $4,500 a month times 12 months. The gross rent is $54,800 per year. That's the gross rent. We need to take off the expenses. We're going to assume 30% expenses, annual expenses. So we're left with only 70% of the $50,000 of the $54,000. So we end up with $37,800 in net annual operating income. All right, so this one duplex, we earned $37,800. Okay, so this is a very conservative example that I'm doing for you guys here. So it'll give you a sense of what's possible, because this is absurdly conservative. We're going to assume the rent does not increase for 10 years. And that's just not going to happen. The rent's going to go up. But in this example, just to illustrate the point that I'm making, to show the contrast between getting rich the slow way versus the fast way, the rent does not increase for 10 years. So after 10 years, and by the way, again, this is the net operating income. This is after all expenses. So at the end of 10 years, we've earned a total of $378,000 net rent. Okay, so some of you may not be aware, but duplexes are, anything 1 to 4 units acts like a house. So comps matter. The comparable sales matter for duplexes. That's not true for commercial residential property. Commercial residential property is 5 units or more. Generally, they are not treated like homes, but duplexes, in terms of the loan you can get on a duplex, 1 to 4 units in general, the type of loan is the same. The type of loan for 5 units or more, a commercial residential property, is a different animal. It's a higher interest rate. It's treated differently. That's just tradition. So it doesn't make a lot of sense why there's this arbitrary jump between 4 units to 5 units. It becomes much different to get the loan for 5 or more units. But for 1 to 4 units, it's treated like a house. If you want to get a VA loan, it's much easier to do that for 1 to 4 units than 5 or more units, although it's still possible. Okay, So the duplex acts like a house, and we're going to assume a very conservative increase in the value of the duplex at only 3% per year. That's pretty conservative. If you think about that for 10 years, there's going to be some years in there where it's going to jump more. You know, the economy fluctuates, but we're just going to assume very conservatively over 10 years, the value increases 3% a year. So let's do the calculation. The property initially was purchased for $500,000. We're going to multiply by 3% times, raised to the 10th power because it's 10 years. So the new, at the end of 10 years, the selling value of the duplex is $672,000. So we bought it for $500. 10 years go by, it's now worth $672,000. So we have an increase in value of $672K at the end of 2 years minus what we paid for it, $500K. We have an increase in the duplex selling value of $172,000. That's on top of the rent, the net rent income. So we're going to add the net rent to the increase in value. This is the net rent for the 10 years. This is the increase in value. The gain total is $542,000. Okay, so this is very conservative. The rent never increased, and we assumed only 3% annual gain over 10 years in the value of that property. So let's compare. The slow way, we made $55,296. The fast way, $542,000, right? And you might say, is the real estate riskier? Maybe. But one thing I want to point out here is the U.S. Treasuries are very stable, but so is the real estate. Real estate tends to be a very stable investment. The reason is people always need a place to live. So if you own a duplex, if you're renting out 2 units for 10 years, if they're in good shape in a good neighborhood, they're going to stay rented. And, unless World War III happens, that property is going to be there in 100 years, right? Because properties, there are properties in England that are hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years old, and people buy them and fix them up, and they continue to be useful. Okay, so real estate's a safe investment. So you sort of have to pick your battles. Do I want to earn over $500,000 over 10 years, or do I want to earn $55,000? I think the choice is obvious, but I do want to be fair to Treasuries and point a couple of things out here. There is something to be said for having a stable amount of cash that is not losing value. Putting $100,000 in Treasuries for 10 years, you're not making a lot. You can still get rich if you have more than 100K. You can still get rich on that, because let's say you had a million you put in instead of 100,000. You'd end up at the end of 10 years with $552,000 if you put in $1 million instead of 100,000. But there is something to be said for sleeping at night knowing you've got a big chunk of cash in Treasuries and it's not losing value. It's earning 4.5%. So there is something to be said for that, and there is a place for putting some of your money in a slower growing vehicle that nevertheless will always be there if something bad happened and you needed it. Because you could sell this. If something bad happened, you could sell the Treasuries. There's a secondary market for Treasuries that you can buy and sell U.S. Treasuries on. And if you needed to raise capital, you could sell it. And in fact, it's possible that if interest rates suddenly drop to like 1% again, these Treasuries, your Treasuries at 4.5% would be quite valuable to someone. And you could actually make a nice profit if you sold at that time. But there is something to be said for owning Treasuries. But if you want to get rich the fast way, you kind of want to think about, this is just a duplex in a nice area. In Silicon Valley, you can't get duplexes for $500,000. There are parts in the country where you can get duplexes for $500,000. So if this is like 10 times more money, basically, the fast way. And it's 2 units. How difficult is it to manage 2 units? It's not very difficult. I personally have managed 50 units by myself. Obviously, you want to have management if you can. When you end up with 100, 200 units, 300 units, 400 units, yes, then you have on-site management. But 2 units to manage that is not a freaking big deal. It's, if you were worried about it, you could try to hire a property manager, but it's just, there's nothing to it. If the property's in good condition, if you rented it in good condition, and you can make a couple of phone calls if you need a plumber, you could do this for 10 years, no problem, and you could keep your day job. So if you have any questions about any of this, please post questions in the comments. There's a couple of simplifying assumptions I made here, okay? So if you have spotted those and you want to talk about that, you can leave questions in the comments. And stay tuned for part 2 of this, because part 2 makes this look almost silly by comparison. You will not believe the next installment of this, Getting Rich Two Ways. It's pretty amazing, and it's quite doable. So stay tuned for that. I hope you guys enjoyed this. Again, if you have any questions, post those in the comments. I want to thank everyone for watching, and have a great day.